It is the late summer of 1982. A crane operator arrives at a factory on the edge of Hackney and does something that 6,000 people who once worked inside never imagined they would live to see. He punches a hole through the roof, not to fix it, to reach inside and rip the machines out. Machines that just years earlier were producing 2.5 million tiny cars every single day, destined for children in 130 countries, the largest employer in Hackney, a place where families gave entire generations to the same production line. Walk along Insolvency Road in Hackney today, and the silence is the first thing you notice. Residential developments line the canal. Balconies, bicycle racks, a coffee shop on the ground floor. Nothing marks what this place once was. Beneath those foundations lies the memory of Lesney Products, the company the world knew as Matchbox. The year is 1947. Britain is patching itself back together. Bomb sites, ration books, a country trying to remember what normal felt like. Two Royal Navy veterans named Leslie Smith and Rodney Smith, no relation to each other despite sharing a surname, take the money they were handed at demobilization. £600 between them. They need premises, and what they find is perfectly in keeping with the times. A derelict pub in Edmonton called the Rifleman. Condemned, leaking, cramped. They set up an industrial die-casting foundry inside it anyway. Lesney Products begins with no ambition beyond survival. Ceiling hooks, engine parts, components for electrical goods. Britain is rebuilding, and there is work to be done. The money is modest, and so are the horizons. Then the third partner arrives and changes everything. Jack Odell served in the Royal Army Service Corps as a tank repairman. School had finished for him at 13. What he lacked in formal education, he more than compensated for with a mechanical instinct that seemed almost innate. He was renting a corner of the Rifleman for his own equipment when the Smiths arrived at an understanding that would shape the next 3 decades. They did not simply need another tenant. They needed Jack Odell's brain. The 3 men who would build the empire could not have been more different from one another. Leslie ran the numbers with a caution that bordered on anxiety. Never comfortable unless the ledger balanced, Rodney kept the operation running, but lacked the restlessness that drives a company forward. He would walk away in 1951, certain the business had no real future. He would spend the remainder of his life being wrong. And then there was Jack, self-taught, instinctive, a man who could look at a die-casting machine and imagine possibilities that nobody else in the room had considered. What none of them could have anticipated was that a conflict breaking out thousands of miles away would very nearly end everything before it had properly begun. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, the British government placed restrictions on zinc, a metal critical to munitions production. For a company whose entire operation depended on zinc alloys, this was not a setback. It was a threat to existence. When the restrictions eventually eased, industrial orders remained unpredictable. The company faced the question that would define its future: find a different product or wait for the next crisis to finish them off. They turned to toys. Their first attempt came in 1948, a die-cast road roller, modeled closely on a dinky design that was already selling well. But Odell's tool-making ability meant Lesney could manufacture it at a fraction of Dinky's cost without sacrificing any of the detail. The principle that would carry the company through its greatest years announced itself quietly. Better engineering, cheaper price. The validation they needed arrived with the 1953 coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Lesney produced a miniature replica of the Gold State coach in 2 sizes. It was the smaller version, the one they almost abandoned because material shortages made producing sufficient quantities of the larger scale impossible, that sold over 1 million units. A triumph born almost entirely from a supply problem. The profits bought them the space to leave the rifleman behind and invest in something more serious. But Odell was not interested in consolidation. He was looking for a structural advantage, something that changed not just the product, but the entire logic of how toys reached children. The founding story involves his daughter and her school's rule that any toy brought in had to fit inside a matchbox. Odell made her a tiny brass road roller. The story may be accurate. There are versions that dispute it, but the commercial insight it produced was entirely real and entirely Odell's. Standardizing the toy to matchbox dimensions solved a distribution problem that no competitor had thought to address. The products became uniform, stackable, easy to display on a small counter. They could sit in a tobacconist, a newsagent, a sweet shop, anywhere children spent their pocket money on a Tuesday afternoon. Not just at Christmas, not just in a toy shop, everywhere, all year round. The matchbox was not merely a box. It was the key to an entirely different retail strategy. In 1953, Lesney registered the Matchbox trademark. The first 4 models of the 175 series went on sale. A road roller, a dumper, a cement mixer, a tractor. The numbering system became a language of its own. Children did not simply buy the cars. They hunted them, catalogued them, competed over who had the most. The 1-75 series was less a product range than a collecting obsession. As orders multiplied, Lesney consolidated its operations at Lee Conservancy Road in Hackney. Through the late 1950s and across the following decade, the factory grew into something remarkable. The smell reached you before anything else did. Hot mazac and machine oil layered beneath the sharp edge of drying cellulose paint. The noise was relentless, more than 150 automatic die-casting machines running simultaneously, a rhythm that did not stop for weekends or public holidays. Nearly 2,000 gallons of lead-free paint used every single week. 2.5 million components cast, sprayed, and assembled each day. The workforce at its height exceeded 6,000. A large proportion were women from the surrounding area, the Matchbox Girls. Ferried in each morning on a fleet of double-decker buses the company had painted in its own blue and yellow livery. Beyond the factory itself, Lesney sustained a cottage industry across the borough. Families spent evenings at kitchen tables assembling components for piece-rate pay. The company was not simply the biggest employer in Hackney. It was woven into the economic fabric of the place in ways that went far beyond a wage packet. By 1966, annual production had passed 100 million units. The Queen's Award for Industry followed. Jack Odell was presented to the monarch. 2 men who had started in a leaking, condemned pub with £600 between them had built something that the British establishment had formally recognized as exceptional. They had also, without knowing it, attracted the attention they would come to regret. Hubris is a quiet thing until it isn't. By 1968, the Lesney Board's confidence in its product was absolute. Matchbox cars were precise, durable, grounded in the real world. Heavy wheels, solid axles, faithful replicas of vehicles that actually existed. Jack Odell's conviction that children wanted accuracy over fantasy had been confirmed by 15 years of sales figures. There was no obvious reason to question it. Then Mattel introduced Hot Wheels, chrome wheels, near-frictionless axles, metallic paint finishes that caught the light differently from any angle, bright orange plastic track systems that could be bent into loops and ramps. These were not cars designed to be pushed carefully along a bedroom carpet. They were designed to be launched. In American playgrounds, the contrast with Matchbox was immediate and total. Accuracy did not stand a chance against spectacle. It turned out children did not want accuracy. They wanted speed. They wanted drama. They wanted a car that could fly off a ramp and land on the other side. The commercial damage arrived fast. American orders dried up. Retailers dropped contracts. In 1969, a company that had been recording profits turned over a loss of £700,000. At the same moment, a tax bill of £2 million arrived, the legacy of the previous year's record earnings. The board had no time for a measured response. It was adapt immediately or face the end. They called it the Superfast revolution, though panic would have been the more honest word. Every tool and die across the Hackney operation had to be modified to take thinner axles and wider plastic wheels. Production lines were interrupted for months. The cost ran into millions. It was crisis management expressed in metal and tooling. The Superfast range launched in 1969 and steadied the ship. Market share recovered. The board exhaled. What nobody said was what the exercise had cost them. The financial cushion that Lesnie carried into the 1970s was considerably thinner than it had been. And the 1970s were not a decade that rewarded thin cushions. Stagflation settled across the British economy. Energy costs climbed. The price of zinc and oil-derived plastics rose with them. Every component in the Hackney operation became more expensive to produce year on year, with no compensating movement in retail prices. At the same time, the atmosphere inside the factory was changing in ways that could not be fixed with a new product line. The warmth of the early years, the sense of shared endeavor that the Smiths and Odell had cultivated through the 1950s and 60s, did not survive the efficiency drives of the following decade. The workforce was heavily unionized. The toolroom workers, men whose knowledge of mold behavior and metal properties existed inside their hands as much as their heads, pushed back against management demands for faster output. The social contract that had made Lesnie a place people were proud to work in began to deteriorate. In 1976, an attempt to restructure shift patterns and remove overtime opportunities led to the dismissal of 9 machine setters who refused the new arrangements. The case reached the Court of Appeal. Lord Denning ruled in Lesnie's favor, confirming that companies could alter working terms without triggering redundancy payments, provided the volume of work remained unchanged. The ruling was a significant legal victory. On the factory floor, it registered as a declaration of intent. Workers who had once identified with the company felt the distance between themselves and the boardroom open into something permanent. The legal win changed nothing about the underlying arithmetic. By the early 1980s, the pound sterling had strengthened sharply. For a British manufacturer dependent on the American market, a rising pound did not simply reduce margins. It made British goods functionally unaffordable for foreign buyers overnight. Competitors had already addressed this by shifting production to Hong Kong and Macau, cutting their cost base to levels that Hackney could not approach from within the constraints of London wages and rates. Lesnie closed 10 of its 13 plants. More than 40% of the workforce was cut between 1980 and 1982. Bank debt climbed past £20 million. None of it was enough. On the 11th of June 1982, Lesnie Products and Company Limited was declared insolvent. Receivers were appointed. For the people of Hackney, the factory that had seemed as fixed a part of the landscape as the canal beside it turned out to be as vulnerable as everything else. A buyer was found. He was not British. David Yeh had started his working life as a bank teller in Hong Kong and built himself into a major figure in the Asian toy industry by following a single principle with unwavering consistency. Manufacturing moves to wherever labor is cheapest. He had no connection to Hackney, no history with the workforce, no interest in the idea of British manufacturing as something worth preserving for its own sake. His reasoning was clean and unsentimental. The Matchbox name was known in every significant market on Earth. Decades of recognition, built into the brand without any further investment required. Keep the intellectual property. Move production to Macau and the Chinese mainland. Let the name do the selling. The physical end of the Hackney operation was not marked by a ceremony or a closing speech. It was marked by a crane breaking through the roof. To get the heavy, custom-built die-casting machines out of the building and onto transport for Macau, the new owners removed a section of the factory roof. The equipment that British engineers had designed and installed, that had run continuously for decades producing the cars that filled the toy boxes of an entire generation, was lifted out into the Hackney air and driven away east. The transfer of manufacturing from Britain to Asia was not, in that moment, an abstraction. It was visible from the street. The human cost left in the wake of the insolvency was severe. Pension legislation in 1982 offered workers little protection when a company collapsed. The fund was tied to asset realizations at distressed prices. People who had given 20 and 30 years to Lesney found their retirement provisions tied to whatever the receivers could recover. For many, that meant a fraction of what they had been promised. The post-mortems produce predictable verdicts. Union representatives blamed management decisions. Management cited global market forces. Both were partially right. The collapse was the product of a series of pressures that converged at the worst possible moment. A costly retooling exercise that left the company financially exposed. A strengthening pound that destroyed export competitiveness. Asian manufacturers operating at labor costs that London could never match. A company that had been weakened by one crisis arriving at the next, without the reserves to absorb it. Jack Odell would not accept it as a full stop. In 1982, he bought back a portion of the older Lesney tooling from the receivers, focusing on the models of yesteryear range. With his partner Bert Russell, he established a new company in Enfield. He named it Lado, his own surname reversed. For 17 more years, Lado produced die-cast vehicles in England, a deliberate and stubborn proof that the craft had not died with the company that invented it. The skills existed, the appetite in the market existed. What had failed was the corporate structure around them, not the thing itself. The factory on Lee Conservancy Road stood empty for years. It was demolished in 2010. The site was redeveloped and named Matchmaker's Wharf. Some units became artist studios, most became apartments. The objects, though, outlasted everything. Collectors treat the variations and errors that escaped the Hackney production line as primary sources, physical records of what the factory floor looked like under pressure. The brown Magirus Deutz crane, a color that should never have made it past quality control, and almost certainly did not do so through official channels, sells for figures that would have seemed extraordinary to whoever applied that paint during a quiet hour. Transitional pieces from the 1969 Superfast conversion, bodies tooled for the old wheel system fitted with the new, boxes for the new range containing old stock, are among the most valued finds in the entire collecting world. They are evidence of a factory running at the edge of its capacity, of decisions being made in minutes that would normally take months, of human hands working under pressure that the accountants in London had no way of fully comprehending. Matchbox today is a healthy brand under Mattel. The cars are still on the shelves, children still want them. They are made in China, Vietnam, Thailand. The conditions that made Hackney the center of the miniature car universe, the labor costs, the material expertise, the export relationships built up over 30 years, shifted east across the 1980s and never came back. What remained were the toys themselves, millions of them. In attics, in display cases, in the hands of children who have no idea that the tiny car they are running across the kitchen floor was once part of something extraordinary. Stand at Matchmaker's Wharf today. Close your eyes. Put back the smell of molten mazak and fresh paint. The percussion of 150 die-casting machines. The blue and yellow buses pulling up in the dark before the early shift. 2.5 million components moving through this building every day toward children in 130 countries. Then open your eyes. Canal-side apartments, a coffee shop, silence. The Lesney story is not an isolated one. It is the story of British manufacturing across the second half of the 20th century. Built in the ruins of one war, expanded through the prosperity that followed, and dismantled when the economics of a globalizing world moved on without it. The brilliance was genuine. The achievement was real. Whether different decisions might have extended it, earlier offshoring, a different response to the Hot Wheels threat, better protected reserves, remains genuinely uncertain. Some of what happened was avoidable. Some of it may simply have been the tide. What the tiny cars prove is that the things Lesney made were worth making. They survive. They are still cherished, still traded, still passed between generations as though they carry something that cannot quite be named. The factory is gone. The cars roll on. What do you remember about Matchbox? A number from the 1 to 75 series, a specific model, the sound of the box sliding open. Leave it in the comments below. And if there are other chapters of British industrial history you think deserve this kind of attention, tell us. We read every single one.